So welcome everyone to the Arrows Group Future Tech podcast. I'm Charlie Sell, I'm the Group MD here at Arrows Group, and I'm with Rick van der Plas, who works with the CTO in the CTO office, I should say, at GFK. He's got a bit of a story about how he's got there and the varied role he has. So no job titles, and when you work across a business the size of GFK. This is specifically aimed for the Cardiff University students studying STEM. So hopefully you'll get quite a lot out of this. We're looking at a bit about Rick's story, any lessons, challenges he's learned across the road, and then something around emerging technologies. So I'm hoping it's of interest, and your feedback to us would be greatly appreciated. So Rick, welcome. Welcome to the podcast series. How are you today?
I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, good, thank you. Very good. So I guess, Rick, we've just caught up pre the podcast and already starting a bit about your story, but it would be great to hear from your own view, how you got into technology and a little bit about your story.
Yes, sure. So I think that how I really started, this is quite some time ago, but basically I was, when I already was much younger, just always interested in trying to understand how things worked and basically how can you make new things as well. And it started basically getting in a very old crappy HP laptop very many years ago, where I just started coding when I was like, I think 8 or 9, 10 or something like that. Just building applications for well, I wouldn't even call it applications. It started really with static websites, HTML, a little bit of CSS, understanding what kind of code meant what kind of websites, kind of trying to reverse engineer a little bit, downloading templates and trying to just change them in a way that I could build pages for my friends or even for school, simple things. But over the years that kind of developed into much more dynamic languages. I started out in kind of PHP world even. It's a very often discussed language. Some people hate it, some people love it. But that kind of got me started into actually building things, building websites, which I could actually meant. I found it quite interesting because it kind of became more like a hobby. I wasn't really focused on building websites or making money or thinking that this was going to be a huge career for me. It was more, I'm a bit bored and I can try to build a web page or do some stuff and often tie it together with other things, more use it as a need or use it as a tool to solve a specific need. That I would trying to figure out how things work and basically grow from there. That's a long time ago.
Yeah. So where did you study?
So I didn't study. So I really mostly used, forums, web forums, IRC at the time even as well, and really kind of self-sufficiently trying to figure out how things work, which was not always easy because I'm Dutch. So English is a second language for me. Which helped me as well over time to be able to kind of I had to be able to understand English too. So I had to kind of be a bit more earlier than necessarily on school to try to understand what things meant, but basically use the resources online that were available. And I think if I look now, many years later, that there's so many more resources and accessible resources available online and tutorials and tools and YouTube and Code Academy and Udemy. Things that did not exist back then. So the whole my kind of reverse engineering path, I would say, is much less needed today, where there's tons and tons of resources online, which you didn't have so many years ago.
Yeah, fantastic. And so you're now working at GFK for the CTO office. Can you explain a little bit more about what that actually entails?
Yes, yeah, it's a bit vague, and that's kind of the nature of the role, to be honest, as well. So basically, I work for the group CTO of GFK, and I don't really have a specific kind of thing or area where I operate in. I operate across the entire business, and just to give some context, that business is almost 10,000 people large. About 1,000 or so of them are technology related. We have all kinds of different business pillars and different products in different regions around the world. So it's quite a big company. and I basically operate horizontally across that. But sometimes I also can do a deep dive into a vertical. So I would be kind of a head of engineering for a project to get it up and running or help it transform. I would run in terms of transformation, agile. I would basically run agile trainings and coaches and get people on board with a little bit more modern way of thinking, or a different way of thinking. I would organize events. So we had, or for example, with a team of people, we organize a developer conference. There is, the overall horizontal kind of agile capability parts, but also technical maturity parts. So we try to get, cloud native technologies. We try to get much more automation, resource. Siri is also very interested and starts talking to me what I'm doing. So I'm quickly going to turn off Siri. So technical maturity wise, moving things to cloud, use cloud native, basically capabilities as much as possible, and basically help transform, GFK in a much more, technology native company, if that makes sense. And that's not just on a technology phase, but also in a, ways of working, product development, and making sure that we kind of build products and tools that people want to use, and we can of course commercially sell.
And so it's not typical to have such a varied role. How did you get into that position?
Yeah, it's a very unusual role, and I think it suits a little bit with my personality. And I think that I have a very good, I think, dynamic with my boss, really, where he's also a little bit. I hope he doesn't listen to this, but he's sometimes a little bit unorganized, and he just has problems everywhere. And then kind of this kind of role emerged where there was kind of this match between what kind of he needed and also frankly the company needed, in a sense as well, where there's always stuff going on, and my personal tendency to get bored quite quickly, I think helps kind of marry those two things together, where I don't need to kind of set into a role, or run projects for 2-3 years, and then potentially move to another company, but actually have a chance to just stay within the same company and operate across it. And the longer I've basically been there, the easier it's become for me to navigate it, understand the company, and know who to find where for what, if that makes sense.
Yeah, fantastic. So thinking about challenges or advice, with our listeners being graduates who are either going to be graduating, well, hopefully, fingers crossed, this year or next year, and to where you've got, is there any advice or lessons you've learned in your career that would put them in good stead?
Yeah, sure. I think there's a couple of them in different, I think in different areas. I think it's not very ordered, maybe a couple of items. So I would say, it sounds a bit counterintuitive, but the more that companies and people move to cloud and cloud tooling, which is the best thing ever, because I'm a quite lazy person as well, honestly, and I don't want to deal with a lot of servers and stuff and whatnot. But that's kind of at the same time where the caveat sits. If you come in now into the IT kind of workforce, the IT space, and you really just use only cloud native tools, I think it can be very easy to kind of forget or not realize the impact of some of your design choices or architectural choices if you don't really fully understand the background of how cloud operators work as well, how actual servers work as well, what's the actual things that break at scale, where you wouldn't notice a lot of these things if you're just building your first website or if you're building on a smaller company. But if you really start working on bigger environments, I think it's quite useful to have kind of this helicopter view, kind of understand from downside servers. You don't need to operate them or work in a data center, but from just having basic conceptual understanding to high level application principles, have that end-to-end view, I think is quite useful, if that makes sense. Secondly, as I said, there is tons and tons of resources online on building technology and building build on tooling and on any kind of language or framework you can think about. I think what is often underexposed, or people not necessarily think about as much, that they're too focused often on technology and too focused on tooling. And I'm sure that you're smart enough that one way or another you can pick up a language, or you can pick up a technology, or you can pick up a ways of working, but they're always a means to an end, and the technology itself is not the end. That's not really the goal. In the end, you of course you're building something that needs to create value one way or another, and that can be value to your to customers of what you actually sell, or it can be value to your business, that you're helping operational tools that make the business run more effective, or whatever it is. The technology is very rarely the goal, and I think that kind of gets misconstrued often, where they're not the same thing. You use technology generally to get a goal and not as the goal. And I think that requires a different mindset. I think depending on where you go, and of course what your career desire is as well. I think the biggest, I wouldn't say hurdle, but the I'm not sure how to formulate it really, but it's more that once you start going into more kind of management roles, which is, you want to go to, depends of course on your ambition and where you're comfortable, and what kind of ratio of technology versus human kind of percentage you want to deal with, because that's very personal as well. Some people really want to focus on technology and want to become the the best individual contributor there is, and some people don't necessarily find that interesting and want to move more to project based or product based development, and kind of manage people and teams, which is a different kind of dynamic entirely as well. I started noticing that when I started going from individual contributor to running my first team, which was only like 3-4 people, I think that step from individual contributor to kind of more guidance or management or whatever you want to call it roles, I think that's a step where you basically feel very, how should I frame it? You almost feel like you're a fish on dry land, we say in Dutch. I'm not sure if that translates, but that's kind of how you feel like, because everything you've used to kind of measure yourself against success does no longer count. So when you're, and when you're an engineer, you would, measure your success by, how many lines of code did I write, or that's a very bad example. You should never do that. That's never a measure for success, but more about how many features did you ship, or how many stories did you finish in your sprint, or, how much extra revenue did you generate? Like that's very tangible and direct kind of, feedback on your progress. Whereas if you start managing people, that actually all starts to decline. You start to write less code. You start to be picking up less stories from sprints. And that initially can start feeling like you are not as productive anymore. And I think it is something, it's like a mental click that needs to just, you need to just start feeling and start understanding that your output and your productiveness is starting to be measured very differently. It's not so much more about how many features you write, but how fast is your team? How long is the retention of the people that you do hire? How many people did you help promote? How do you run your overall product development, your overall project? And especially as you grow in scale. So for comparison, the last project I've run, and we just successfully delivered on say between, depending on the phase, between 100 and 150 people. So that's really a significant business unit. I almost never get to write code myself anymore, and that's sad in a way, because I think you should. And I'm still looking at pull requests and trying to get close to what's going on, but you cannot realistically expect at that scale that you're going to be writing critical features. I still try to write small things and understand, keep in the loop, but there's just not enough time. And there's going to be a phase where you would be, I think, too focused on staying too close to it, and you actually end up hurting everybody around you, because you will miss your deadlines and you will miss your commitments because you have so much other stuff to deal with. So that was a hurdle, and I think there's some really good books out there. I think The Manager's Path from Camille Fournier is a very good one that gives a kind of an overview of what actually is part of every role in the different levels in software engineering. And there's a couple of those ones, but I think that's the one where I feel least supported, even if I've always had very supportive leaders. Like, it just needs to click in your head, and I think that's the hardest thing, that you cannot really you can be taught how to really think like that. You just need to kind of experience and feel it. But maybe that's too soon to cover. That's for
No,
many
but
people a
it's
little more down the line.
aspiration, isn't it? No, that's fantastic because I think it's so important when people are looking at their careers of trying to map out whilst also having the flexibility and understanding that life changes very quickly. So you have to be adaptable and leadership and getting promoted and being guided. If you have the right mentors, is really going to help, isn't it? And I really like your point that it's not about the technology; it's about what technology is creating, which is a mindset that people need to think about. So thinking about emerging technologies then, and all the work that you see that comes across GFK, have you got any thoughts yourself on where you think that the newest skill sets or technology advancements are going?
Yeah, sure. I see. I think a huge shift between. I think a couple of things. I think traditionally people or companies more were looking for like coders. And I'm not sure what I'm saying, but there's something that Siri finds very interesting because Siri keeps listening. So I'm going to just go it away. Maybe it doesn't interrupt us every time. I think historically companies were always looking for, not always, but we're looking for just coders, someone that needs to build the application. I think that's not in every company, but in many companies, that's shifting to really much more. They're looking for actual software engineers. They're not just looking for someone to write and type the code, but they're actually someone to think, help them form the product as well, help design the user experience. And I don't mean that you need to be a designer, but more from a logical point of view, what makes sense, what are the user flows, what are the user journeys, again, what are you trying to accomplish here, and actually be more like a much more than just a coder itself, but actually much more a holistic partner in developing a solution. The other part is, I mentioned it briefly, obviously, cloud computing changed everything really, much more, where even though I still believe it's useful to, even if it's just in the weekends, to go from a scratch and still understand how you install a web server and how you run it, and what the leaks are, and get some networks and VPCs running, just so you understand how it fits in the bigger picture. But separate from that, you don't really need to deal with that anymore. It's all in the cloud, and it's all clickable, and it's all automatable. I think where we are going is that we've kind of gone from, over the last decade or so, we've gone from on-premise data centers to cloud data centers. And I think now you start to see more and more shift to not just cloud data centers, but actual native cloud native tools, where previously you would still spin up and manage servers in EC2, whereas today you would leverage much more lambdas, serverless technologies, RDS, Kinesis, and all these tools that you don't really need to run anymore. It's just you can focus fully on what is the thing you want to create, and the abstractions are getting higher and higher. And in a way that's good. Again, I mentioned it already, I'm pretty lazy. I don't necessarily want to deal with networking and firewalls and all that kind of stuff. On the other hand, there's a risk that it kind of does dump you down if you've never worked with that stuff in the past. You don't always, I think, understand how all the things interrelate, and also where the risks and scalability issues are. Yeah, I think those are a couple of things. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, yeah, I think that's been perfect. So in summary, for thinking around not making a software engineer about being a pure coder, but actually about how you can help add value to either the customer or internally, and actually be a true developer in that sense. I mean, we hear a lot about polyglot engineering now, where it's more around being able to develop within a full stack skill set rather than being a specialist C# developer or J2ME developer. And
yeah, that kind of ties in what I was. I didn't call that explicitly, but indeed, in the past you would be very focused on a technology, and that's I think there's a finite time that you can be the best C# developer, or the best Java developer, or the best. There 40 years ago there were people that were the best Fortran developers, and although they probably make a lot more money now while they're still maintaining all the banking mainframes. That's not generally where I think the value lies in people anymore. It's indeed being able to use the right tools for the right jobs,
Yeah.
being, going from back to front, as you say, being able to do the entire thing, think through, the customer's needs, all the way to, how do we scale this database. And obviously you can be an expert in everything, and you shouldn't try to be as well.
Yeah.
I often call myself a full stack developer by necessity, which means I can do full screen, or I can do full stack, and I can do the front end, and I can do React, and I can do Meteor, and the whole thing. But something in me just, there's only so many times I can try to fix a CSS header and get it working on all kind of browsers before something snaps in me, and I just kind of want to go back to my backend and really just do my API calls. That's really where my strength, lies, and I have no issues with, complex data structures and figuring everything out. But the moment somebody asks me to optimize this image for 12 different screen types, I get a bit mad. So it's you should be, work on your T, know your strengths, but you should know a little bit about everything, I think.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Well, thank you, Rick. I think that's been really useful and insightful. I mean, it's inspiring to see how far you've come in a relatively short amount of time to where you've reached, and your view on technology. And I think what you said at the beginning as well, that although you didn't study it, you self-taught, which is as important as anything else. The amount of information out there now, students, they should have access to everything. So it's about a passion. I also think you can see it with yourself. If you're passionate about something and you dedicate your time and invest in it, you can be as successful as anyone else. I'm thinking about
No, absolutely. Yeah, and then this is the maybe obviously you need to really like what you're doing. Personally, for me, it started out as a hobby, and it kind of worked itself into a career by accident almost. But you don't. What you say? You don't. Honestly, you don't need much more than yourself, a laptop, and Google, and you'll get pretty far. And it sounds very cliche, but every time somebody told me that you can't do this or you can't do that or that doesn't work, that has only always inspired me much more, and to be much more fierce on proving them desperately wrong. And you will figure it out, even if you don't know stuff. Google is your friend.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, look, thank you. So this is the podcast, Arrows Group Future Tech podcast, as I said, for Cardiff, for the students there at Cardiff. So I hope this one's been of interest. Thank you again, Rick. And we will look forward to the next series.